shrinking space for civil society across the Western Balkans. It has restrictions on the institutional and political environment in which civil society organizations operate. The trend is concerning, despite the fact that negotiations for EU accession provide an opportunity for civil society to advocate and propose policies to the government, particularly on human rights issues. One of the common features that worsen the continuing decrease in the space for civil society in the Western Balkans region is that the media freedom has come under threat in the recent years. Intimidation against journalists is increasing, and that suffocates as well investigative journalism. Media is heavily influenced by political and business interests. In overall, it is vital to boost the rule of law, civil dialogue, pluralism and social justice in the region of Western Balkans, as well to strengthen the fight against corruption. The partnership between the governments and the civil society is crucial in that regard. It is vital to have free and independent media as well. Now I would like to give the floor to our session chair, Mr. Maričić.
Thank you so much, distinguished guests, dear speakers. I really feel like at home after quite a time being on this panel with all the people I know and speaking about topics that are so close and familiar to us. In my previous life before coming into politics, I really much enjoyed this session, so today it will be a refreshment for me, and I hope that we will have a good contribution, all of us, in order to increase the quality of this high-class event, in my opinion. The topic is a topic that is quite prominent and always current: the civil society and the media in the regional and European integration process. I would organize my address in 3 questions, as it was there. And as a person who has both of the experiences in the civil society and on the side of the executive in the past 4 years, I can tell you that the role of the civil society is absolutely indispensable for the domestic policy processes and for the regional policy process. And this is not only a phrase. I will give you examples. In the Ministry of Justice that I run and in all the legislative processes, we never establish a working group, or we never finish the process of lawmaking without involving the civil society organizations. And this is something that always brings the quality of the law on a higher level. This is not a practice, of course, in all the ministries or in all the at all levels, but for the Ministry of Justice, this is extremely valuable, because the civil society organizations can reach to groups that the government cannot all the time, and they have the information and the arguments that we don't have all the time when we are sitting in the institutions. This was the case for unregistered people, the law on unregistered people. This was the case with the law on mediation. This was the case for other laws for implementing the European Court of Human Rights practices and decisions. So I can tell you that the role of the civil society in the domestic policy process and the European integration is indispensable. The political parties are always prone to be more close and more conservative regarding the topics imposed by the civil society. This is why it's important to have them on the table at all times. Speaking about the regional dimension, I can also make 2 examples. In the case of Prespa agreement, and Ioannis is here, he knows very well, and the rest of you as well, the civil society in North Macedonia and in Greece, including here the media and other intellectuals and social structures, did their homework before the signing of the Prespa agreement. And I think they built the bridges, the necessary bridges, that didn't let the politicians to dominate the narrative all the time. I mean, me as a politician shouldn't say this, but this is, actually, now I'm more an analyst in this panel. In the case of Bulgaria, it's not the same. In our case with having this dispute or discussions with Bulgaria, I think the politicians dominated the narrative, and the civil society, the media, or let's say progressive civil society and media didn't do their homework entirely in this, and the context is quite different. I hope that this will happen in the future. And I encourage the civil society and the progressive media to do more in building the bridges between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. And this stands for all the regional issues, in my opinion. I can't elaborate on all of them, but it stands for all the issues. Speaking about the media and the role of the media, I think we always at regional stage speak about media freedom, and that is primary, that is good. But we need to introduce the topic also about media responsibility, because we have an increasing issue of fake news, disinformation, hate speech, something that it's very difficult for the institutions to cope. I can tell you, myself personally, other journalists and civil society representatives are facing hate speech threats and fake news instruments, formal or informal. There is something, but at the level of ethics, still not, even through the institutional framework and the ethical framework on these issues is, in my opinion, necessary, because the stereotypes, the hate, the regional ethnic-centered issues are produced basically through fake news and through hate speech of the mainstream, of the or let's say electronic media like portals and etc. So I think strengthening the responsibility and expanding the freedom at the same time will bring a lot of new quality in the European integration and also in the regional cooperation. Finally, about the regional initiatives and regional projects, I think that it's of utmost importance that we introduce new topics at regional stage or at regional level. It's not, I mean, I'm in this process, Berlin process, for example, for quite a time, for 7-8 years. We can follow that more or less the same topics are being discussed. But I think, for example, that issues like rule of law, anti-corruption, media freedoms, and of course, media responsibility are topics that are common to, including the fake news and everything else, are topics that are common for all the countries of the region of the Western Balkans. And we have similar problems, and we can find joint solutions. Because, for example, last week in Ohrid, at this lake, the ministers of justice and home affairs of the Western Balkan countries that are in the Berlin process have endorsed a roadmap fighting against corruption. This was something that was extremely problematic 3 years ago. I remember when in London we were about to sign some kind of pledges as government, some kind of statements fighting against corruption. It was, we couldn't reach a consensus just 3 years ago. So last week we introduced a roadmap. I know that we have a lot of roadmaps in the region, but it is a step forward to open this regional topic and to sit on the table, the ministers, the public prosecutors, the judges, to work together on this joint issue. And I think this is the way to go. So we need to push new topics that are bittering and that are pushing at a regional level, like is it a technique? Yeah, okay. Like judiciary, like fight against corruption, and like fake news. This will bring a new quality in the dynamics of the region, and this will certainly strengthen the civil society, the role of the civil society. And finally, I hope that in the next events and next panels of this type, we will have the joy to share that North Macedonia has started the negotiations with the European Union. Thank you.
Hopefully that will be the case. Thank you, Mr. Mariček. And just coming from the EU member country, I have to underline that sometimes it's very important for civil society and media to be kind of corrective element to the implementation of perfect legislation that we had it in our negotiation process, but somehow we are lagging behind, especially in fight against corruption and rule of law as well. Now we would see pre-recorded message from Mr. Michael Roth.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dear friends, congratulations for organizing the first international conference of the Prespa Forum Dialogue on the topic Western Balkans, the missing puzzle for completing Europe, under the auspices of the Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Zoran Zaev. While I very much regret not being able to attend in person, I'm really honored to be able to speak to you on the tremendously important topic of civil society and the media in the regional and European integration processes. The missing puzzle for completing Europe corresponds with our paradigm that Western Balkans are the inner courtyard of Europe, surrounded by EU member states. The European Union will not be complete without your countries, your societies, and your people. As you know, civil society forums are an integral part of the Berlin process. Exactly 1 month ago, on the 1st of June, I had the pleasure of opening the energetic and vibrant discussions in the frame of the Berlin process and its upcoming summit. We tasked participants with a challenging agenda covering key political and socio-economic topics. The recommendations of the working groups proved how engaged and committed civil societies are in the Western Balkans. Civil society must be engaged to bring about change, ensure bottom-up control, and improve the equality of democracy. The reassuring message of the forum is that civil society demands to play an active role in domestic and regional processes, including the EU enlargement. The participants also recommended that civil society could be involved in political and economic processes by playing a stronger role in the respective parliaments of the Western Balkans. Notably, the engagement of civil society is essential to facilitate reconciliation, for instance, in the case of Serbia and Kosovo. In the closing panel, the participants also emphasized that bilateral questions, for example, Macedonian and Bulgarian relations, should not stand in the way of the EU accession process. Yes, they are completely right. I couldn't agree more. I deeply regret that the Council of Ministers for Europe did not agree on opening accession talks with Albania and our Macedonian friends because of the vote of a single member state. Without a vibrant civil society, there can be no functioning democracy. The activism and engagement of civil society shape democracy. Focusing on the Western Balkans in particular, civil society plays an even more important role in overcoming the legacies of the past. Cooperation among people is essential for reconciliation and to move forward together. North Macedonia in particular has invested significant efforts to create a multi-ethnic society. 20 years after the Ohrid Framework Agreement. Given that this is a long road for every society, we must invest further efforts every single day in order to consolidate a peaceful and strong society. To reach this aim, we also need free and independent media. Impartial reporting combined with media literacy are the best means to counter internal and external disinformation. Not surprising, many recommendations of the Civil Society Forum pointed to the importance of media and its role, including an appeal to the EU to create a favorable environment for media freedom, literacy, and counter disinformation. I couldn't agree more on these priorities, and Germany as well as the European Union are ready to continue their support in these particular areas. Nevertheless, let me also recall the responsibility journalists and media representatives bear. It's primarily their duty to engage every day to ensure impartiality and reliable information as part of their service to the community. This starts with the rejection of hate speech. As I said to the participants of the Civil Society Forum, solidarity, respect, and collaboration among people, both inside and among your respective countries, is the best vaccine against the spreading of nationalistic ideas that only foster division and lead the region away from EU core values. North Macedonia and Greece made a historic step by signing the Prespa Agreement 3 years ago. This extraordinary success was exemplary for what can be achieved, and that even long-standing conflicts can be solved by courageous and impressive statesmanship in the interest of the societies and its people. Exchanges such as these of today and tomorrow at the Prespa Forum Dialogue are a key factor for successful integration of citizens within civil societies. Transforming a country requires the whole population, and transformation is essential for the further EU integration of the region. Therefore, governments must listen to their citizens, even or especially when they criticize their decisions. Citizens can't escape their duty to take part in the political life of their respective countries. To make this exchange effective, Western Balkan governments are obliged to actively follow up on their commitments, in particular fighting nepotism and corruption and strengthening rule of law. Significant importance is attributed to civil society and media when they shed light on crucial issues that get neglected in reform discussions about the rule of law, judiciary, or public administration. In particular, I'm referring to environmental topics. We need to bear in mind that environmental protection and climate change are the most pressing global challenges. How we deal with these challenges will define the future of generations to come. Pollution is already affecting many Western Balkan cities, especially during the winter. There is also a need to protect the unique nature and biodiversity and promote sustainable tourism sectors in the Western Balkan countries. In saying this, I think fondly of my last trips to North Macedonia and Albania in May and the wonderful landscapes, for instance Lake Ohrid with its unique nature. This is a precious treasure for our entire continent. Citizens can push these vital topics to the top of the agenda and contribute to the implementation of the Green Agenda in the Western Balkans. Dear friends, finally, I would like to stress that cooperation is the main tool to guarantee a long-lasting democratic and inclusive society. However, cooperation can only be successful when the opinions of citizens and civil societies are being heard by governments and politicians. Otherwise, fruitful cooperation is impossible. Furthermore, free and independent media plays an indispensable role in every democratic society. I wish you dynamic and fruitful discussions and hope to see you in person as soon as possible. Stay tuned. Thank you so much.
I think some of the messages from perhaps the most influential capital within the EU were very clear that have been sent there. And the last one again about the media, which sometimes regarding negotiations and closing the chapters is the first one to close, but at the end of the day, perhaps it's much more complex issue than it looks like in the beginning. Now we go to the southern parts of Europe. Mr. Benedetto Della Vedova should join us.
Thank you, Chair. From Rome, I don't know if it's the second or the third most influential capital in Europe.
Buongiorno, good morning.
Buongiorno, but by sure is the most close to North Macedonia. Thank you and good morning to everybody. First of all, let me say I'm sorry that the last-minute government engagement made impossible my physical participation to the event. I promise that as soon as possible I will pay a visit to North Macedonia. I was looking forward to be in Prespa today to have the opportunity to discuss finally in person after all we had to go through with the pandemics. Nevertheless, I am confident that this forum will prove fruitful and helpful in the challenges we have ahead. Let me underline Italy's deep appreciation for North Macedonia's initiative with the launching of Prespa Forum Dialogue. This forum is another tangible sign of Skopje's strong commitment to dialogue and cooperation in the region. It consolidates North Macedonia's leadership in fostering mutual respect and understanding in a region whose potential, unfortunately, continues to be undermined by open disputes and bilateral issues. In the past 4 years, North Macedonia has contributed substantially to regional reconciliation, underlining a clear vision about the future of this region. This future, the future of all Western Balkans countries, lies in the European Union. The agreement signed in Prespa in 2018 and the friendship agreement with Bulgaria in 2017 are milestones in advancing towards this future and putting the past definitely behind. These agreements have concretely contributed to improve good neighborly relations, which remains a key benchmark for candidate and potential candidate countries. In March 2020, the European Council acknowledged the significant steps made by Skopje by green-lighting the opening of accession talks with North Macedonia. Our hope was that Prespa Forum would have provided the perfect framework also for celebrating the actual opening of the negotiation with North Macedonia as well as with Albania. With our great disappointment, on June 22, again, it was not possible to achieve this long overdue goal. And our strong concern is that EU credibility in the region is at stake. And I agree on what's said by my friend Michael Roth on the issue. By not delivering our promises, we risk losing the most important battle for the EU in the region, the one for hearts and minds. Civil societies, especially young generations of the Western Balkans, are vocally supporting the European perspective of the region. They are our best ally for making Western Balkans countries advance in democratic transition and consolidate on rule of law, justice and fundamental rights. Failing to open negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania, as well as failing to deliver visa liberalization to Kosovo, would eventually alienate this support. I sincerely hope that the discussions that will take place in Ohrid and in Prespa during these days will contribute to highlight the sense of urgency of moving forward with the EU enlargement to the Western Balkans. I warmly welcome the opportunity provided by this forum to engage civil society, especially youth, from the region about the European integration process. they play a key role in promoting the values which are the cornerstones of the European project, in advocating the reforms that need to be implemented, in making political leaderships accountable for their actions. Civil society is the true catalyst for a structural change in the region. In order to play effectively this role, it is crucial to empower civil society. That means, first of all, eliminating the barriers within the region. During the Sofia summit of the Berlin process in November 2020, Italy welcomed the important progress in terms of regional economic integration envisaged by the action plan for the creation of a common regional market. At the same time, it's crucial to enhance concretely the role of civil society in the European integration process. Let me make one concrete proposal. Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Serbia participate to the EU strategy for the Adriatic-Ionian region, USAIR. By promoting horizontal cooperation, interconnection between EU and Western Balkans region and convergence of interest and national policies for territorial development, USAIR is a concrete tool for supporting EU integration of the region. USAIR is in the position to build on the communities and networks created thanks to project implementation and to scale them up to the political level, to the policy level. Promoting a more inclusive approach by enhancing the role of civil society in USAIR would contribute to strengthen the interaction between policymakers and citizens, ultimately consolidating democracy in the region. More broadly, we firmly believe in the transformative power of civil society. They are the driving force for fundamental shift in the cultural mindset. This is particularly important in a region where reconciliation must still make decisive steps forward. Promoting and investing in a bottom-up process for regional reconciliation should be the top priority. We hope that Prespa Forum Dialogue will become the regional platform for promoting this approach. Media as well bear crucial responsibility in fostering mutual respect and understanding. The spread of hate speech and ethnic discrimination via social media is indeed a source of great concerns and should not be underestimated. Earlier this year, we have clearly seen the destabilizing impact that such media operations can have in the region. Since 2020, Italy is supporting the Regional Cooperation Council in organizing a conference on disinformation aimed at raising awareness in the region about media manipulation and violent narrative. Although these are global challenges, persistent nationalism and divisive rhetoric in the Western Balkans call for close monitoring and effective action. At the same time, it is crucial to avoid that countering disinformation is abused for limiting the freedom of press and expression. These are at the core of the European Union values. Therefore, strengthening and supporting free media must remain a top priority for the governments in the region and for EU action in Western Balkans. I thank you very much, and I look forward to following this very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Della Vedova, for your intervention. And I think the punchline was the sentence, fight for hearts and minds, especially of young generations here in the region of Western Balkans. Mr. Bieber, I don't need to present you in large, Mr. Florian Bieber. When it comes to the rule of law, for instance, one of the main obstacles in establishing full democracy in the Western Balkans, it is obvious that the conditionality of the EU is not enough. And as a result of all the obstacles and challenges in that field, there's been an erosion of trust towards the institutions and the process of EU integration. Would you agree? What is your assessment in that regard?
Thanks. I mean, I think we have two sides of that story. The one side is that, and I'm very glad that the ministers have pointed this out very clearly, that the EU has to live up to its promises. If it doesn't deliver, then of course conditionality and requiring certain measures is very hard to, in a certain way, demand if there is no follow-up, if it's not a merit-based process. And I think this is, I'm very glad that the member states are stating this very clearly, because this undermines the whole logic of the process. So in that sense, the EU has to live up to its promise to say, if you do reforms, if you make the effort, you deserve to move forward in the way we've promised. This is not, this is delivering on what has been promised. But I think it's also the other side is what is going wrong in some parts of the region. And I think it's been nicely stated in the previous interventions that when it comes to hate speech, when it comes to the lack of or declining media freedom, and you've also pointed it's linked in some countries to the declining state of rule of law, clearly what is happening in terms of EU accession is not enough. It's not in a certain way doing the trick anymore. And there are multiple reasons for that, but I think one thing is the lack of clarity sometimes, or the focus on technicalities. So of course the laws have to be in line, the rules have to be there, but that's not enough. It's about the implementation of the rules, and it's about the kind of political commitment behind them. And we see this in some countries where there is a political commitment, and others where at least we have some serious questions sometimes. And there, I think the European Union and its member states should communicate more clearly the problems. So if we're looking at Commission reports, they're very often pointing out, ticking the boxes, saying this has been done and that has been done. But the question is really, is there a substance behind it? I mean, I often use the metaphor of the trees and the forest. You can plant lots of trees, but they don't make a forest. And the same is with the laws. You can have lots of laws, but do they make a forest of rule of law and democracy? And I think this is something which we're often not seeing. I mean, there are some improvements. So last year, the Commission report, for example, clearly said that governments also have to communicate Europe to its citizens. And if the government is denigrating and engaging in hate speech, or supporting media or working with media which engage in hate speech, or which are not communicating the European Union and the integration project in a fair manner, this is going against the process. So in that sense, it's starting that there's a bit clearer communication. But I think what is really needed is clarity in identifying the problems and in pointing out governments which are not living up to that. In that sense, I mean, to conclude, having a free, vibrant media and not attacking civil society, not denigrating civil society is, I think, a sign of commitment to the European integration process. I cannot see how a country can join the European Union with fulfilling the legal requirements while at the same time attacking critical voices in a society, be they in the media, be they social activists. And that's the responsibility of governments, to allow for those voices and to listen to them. If they don't do that, I have serious doubts about the commitment, and I think that's where the European Union has to be clearer on message. In a certain way, more honesty would be well heeded advice for the EU and the region.
Thank you for now, Mr. Bieber. Our next speaker is Ioannis Armakolas, coming from Greece. We know until Greece plunged into a recession spiral, one could say that Greece was perhaps the most ardent advocate for the accession of the Western Balkan countries to Euro-Atlantic organizations. Of course, there was at a certain point of time dispute with Skopje, but in overall, looking from the Athens, do you think that it would be much more helpful if the EU stops giving the support to some autocratic tendencies within the countries of Western Balkans, and that perhaps, it should rather stop doing that than supporting civil societies simultaneously and then losing the strength or the energy, to be much more clear about those tendencies?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dragan. Yes, Greece was an ardent supporter of EU enlargement in the Balkans, and because of the Thessaloniki summit, it had this symbolic element into it. But also, Greece has always been very ambivalent because it was also at the same time blocking North Macedonia, and Greece traditionally sees the process of all these countries joining the European Union, which is in our interest, also through the lens of actually resolving bilateral disputes. And that can become sticky, like it was with the case of North Macedonia, or more recently with Albania. Now I think we are in position Greece is in position to be a better advocate, because we have resolved the name dispute, and despite the problems in the implementation, I think this will stick, this agreement and this new partnership will endure. But of course, in the meantime, like Florian said, what we don't see is actually the European Union respecting its promises. And we should not forget that talking about the Prespa agreement, and Bojan here, Minister, was one of the key negotiators, or one of the people involved in the negotiations. There would not have been possible to reach an agreement with Prespa, in Prespa, if it wasn't for the European integration. Or, to put it differently, had the citizens of North Macedonia known that 3 years down the road they would still not have started accession negotiations, I very much doubt whether the government of Bojan and Zoran Zaev and everybody else would have the legitimacy to reach such an agreement. I mean, it's an extremely important point. Because even President Vučić himself says, I mean, look what happened with Zaev. I mean, why would you believe the European Union? So Florian very rightly mentioned that the credibility of the European Union is on the line here. It's extremely important that we keep our promises to Kosovo, to North Macedonia. Albania is ready to start accession negotiations. They should start. Come on, I mean, we shouldn't stick to the details. And to go back to your question and maybe wrap up with that, yeah, I mean, the European Union is seen as supporting, or not supporting, but not paying enough attention to autocratic tendencies in the region, simply because the main process that would drive the positive change and that would give the civil society the tools and the instruments and the power to pressure the governments to reform is not there. And what is there is those semi-autocrats who seem to be very successful in their game. I mean, President Vučić is an extremely successful guy these days. He's more successful than the EU when it comes to fighting COVID. I mean, let's face it. And those governments that are waiting for the EU to support them, like North Macedonia, waiting for the EU to actually include North Macedonia or Albania in this famous COVID response plan, at the end of the day, they feel frustrated. So yeah, the EU can do more to empower the civil society so that the semi-autocrats have less leverage and less breathing space, but the EU should be more serious about the enlargement process.
But the thing is that even within the EU, there are guys that President Vučić could look up to them and make some similar moves. Mr. Robert Cooper, it is your assessment quite a number of times. You have said that the EU enlargement is the only real solution to Balkan conflicts. What have you meant by that?
I think it's well, the problems of the Balkans are not so different from the problems historically of Europe. These are problems of there are problems of history, there are problems of borders, there are problems of different identities. Those are, after all, the same problems that we have in all across Europe. In my country, people have always regarded the European Union. In fact, people still refer to it sometimes as the European Economic Community. They think of it as an economic operation. And it's true, most of the time, if you look at what people are doing in Brussels, They are making regulations on, well, on everything that you eat, drink, wear, look at is regulated mostly by Brussels. But the point of, I made a big mistake.
They will just going to assist you within a short.
No, it's my ear. I ought to be able to deal with it. My problem is that this is the first time that I've traveled for at least a year. And normally I have a bag that's ready to go on my travels. And when I came here, I found there's no comb in it. So, but most of what the EU does is very boring regulation, actually very useful because it means that the food you eat doesn't poison you. And the cars you drive don't break down and so on. But the real purpose of the European Union is not economic, it's political. And this comes from the doctrine, the discovery of Jean Monnet, that you don't do things together because you are friends, you become friends because you do things together. And the secret is to find the right things to do. And the economic area is an extremely good area. That's fine, but that's, so why can't you just become members overnight? I think in the case of this country, the answer is actually almost why not? At least, why not start the process? It's incredible that it doesn't start. How can you make it start? I don't know. But there must be ways of, I think, I mean, the advice I've given to others is to say, simply, make yourself irresistible. And that, it seems to me, is what is happening here. And eventually the message gets through to Brussels. But you cannot have, well, I was going to say you cannot have too much democracy. I think you need to have the right source of democracy. My advice is have very few referendums, if possible.
Participative democracy, then.
Yes, but you can have different forms of participatory democracy. If you're going to have participatory democracy, you need to have an intelligent debate. And that is what we're talking about here. We're talking about serious media and intelligent civil society. There's a famous quotation from Winston Churchill about democracy being the worst of all systems except for the rest, but there's another quotation from Winston Churchill in which he says, the best argument against democracy is 5 minutes conversation with the average voter. Well, the point of civil society is to make sure that you don't just have average voters, that you have voters who think and voters who understand the problems and voters who can speak the language and say the things that have an impact on ordinary people, but they don't always understand. And therefore, this layer between governments and people, the layer of civil society, is itself a vital constituent of democracy. The stronger the civil society, the stronger the democracy.
Thank you very much for now. Ms. Simonida Kaczarska, I've read somewhere you said that academia, government, and civil society view minority rights and minority protection through the lens of security, European security, but not human rights here in the region. What have you meant by that?
Oh, you actually read something there. This was not announced. Okay. Well, yeah, in one of my lives I was in academia dealing with Europeanization and national minority rights, and I was actually looking at Croatia as well, including what was Macedonia then. I think that in this country specifically, we have tried to engage in a different exercise, in an exercise of building a multi-ethnic community, which I think was mentioned here by State Minister Roth, and this has been an integral part of the EU accession process. However, if we go back to what was the refugee crisis of 2015 here and what we saw, including with the behavior of most, if not all, of the EU member states, I think this illustrates enough as including what is happening at your borders at this point of time and in the in the last couple of years. The intention, at least, of the European integration process was to change that lens as well, in the way that we saw it, in the way that we saw it traditionally. But I don't think that we've reached that, because I think that the legitimacy among the society here of some of those decisions also hinges on the same European integration goal that was linked at a certain time of the road to Brussels goes through Ohrid for some time, it went through Athens for some time, and now it seems to go through Sofia for some time. But I think that now, yes, through Prespa now, and yeah. The issue is, I think, for us, for civil society, and I've been in this for a long time, is to change that narrative, because I think that it doesn't help us. We need to see that road to somewhere, if it's not Brussels, through our own consensus building process here in North Macedonia and in the region, and this is where I see the added value of civil society as such, and the message of winning the hearts and minds of people. But we have to keep in mind, you win hearts and minds within a lifetime. You don't win hearts and minds for your grandchildren as much as you want to. You at least expect something for your children. Let's say I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old almost. And you hope that maybe you'll see them as EU citizens, if not yourself. And I think this is the one message that I would like to start with. Civil society can help in winning the hearts and minds, but it can help if there is a form of a credible partner. And I think we heard here so many times that the credibility is on the verge, I think was what Yanis used, but I think it's down the road. It kind of went down the cliff by now. And we need to find ways to rebuild it. We really need to find ways to rebuild it. If it's not the accession negotiations, we have to think of ways of what to do in the meanwhile. And I think if we go back, the green agenda was mentioned here, sectoral integration, we have to think of ways, but this is a joint process. It can't come just from the region. Everyone here is trying, but if you don't have the accession negotiations as the mantra, as the tool of transformation, which I agree with you, might not have been perfect in the previous enlargement, but that's the tool we have. That's the tool where our mental maps go. And we really need to think of joint ways to reform it if it doesn't work. Because I have seen, and many of people here have seen, what happens if you wait. And I don't think, if you wait for between 2009 and 2015. We know what happened. I had a discussion with I spent a lot of time in Mr. Cooper's country, and people would say that the Brexit was a result of possibly the economic crisis. For me, the 2008 NATO summit, we saw the results in 2015 of the veto in Bucharest. We saw the political crisis which happened later. So now our question is, what will happen in 7 years actually here after this veto? We hope that we are more resilient, and there's a lot of colleagues that here from BPAC that have used that term, but this resilience needs to be built jointly. Civil society is an integral part of this. I would like to mention that we can, and we hopefully with our EU counterparts, we can make an influence to be included, at least from our side, in the discussions on the Conference on the Future of Europe. My colleagues will be discussing that tomorrow, but I think it's fair enough from our side to start with that note, because it will help us to build that joint resilience and maybe think of ways to move things forward.
If I may add, there is a huge and important difference between healthy resilience and unhealthy, which is as well, with frustration that is on the way, not just in this country, but in the whole region, very present. The last participant and speaker in this first round of speakers is Mr. Georgi Vurmo. Would you say, sir, perhaps, and what's the situation in Albania, perhaps just to have comparative analysis, emancipatory civic movements that are coming up, popping up across the region, could they be the center of the broader societal change and that should lead to more democratic, free, just society in the region of Western Balkans as well?
Look, the only work experience I've always had is civil society. I never spent a day working in any other sector. And from time to time, I have this existential crisis. What am I doing here? And maybe should I jump to another sector? I'm not very good in business sector, so probably my options are quite limited. So I keep staying here. I do believe in civil society. I realize that I do my job very good as long as I believe in something. So I'll probably stay in the civil society for as long as I believe in civil society. I do believe that in that power of civil society. Maybe currently there are not the right settings to have that power more into the light. But I truly hope that someday it will. One of the questions in this panel was civil society and government's cooperation. Florian and Ioannis elaborated quite good the EU part. So the EU integration project, among other things in the Balkans, it's not simply about economy and well-being, but it's also about democracy. And maybe this is one of the points that the EU itself has missed on the way, or from time to time they forget. EU integration is deeply about democracy here. And to build that democracy, many of the speakers rightly pointed that civil society, media are crucial, and that we should be heard, and that governments should cooperate with us. Currently, governments ignore us. And it's very ironic question, you know. After many years you've been ignored by your government. Once in a while, your own government comes in, you know, like forums like this and asks you, so what do you think? You know, how are we doing? There was a time when things were much better. Things were much better because the government would not ignore us, they would beat us. Why is that much better? It's much better because it means that we are a sector that somebody believes in us. The people believe in us, or they used to. And so did the internationals, maybe. But currently, we are being observed with some dose of suspicion by our own constituencies, by our own, I mean, the level of trust, public trust in civil society is not at their best levels. But unfortunately, I must say that the internationals currently would rather side with cooperating with political actors who, by the way, we know very good are not so democratic in the region, rather than pushing for civil society and those civic movements that you said, and democracy at any cost. And I think this is one of the problems that we as civil society have. I mean, civil society has many problems. Another problem we have is that the government should hear us, but the government should do whatever we say. I mean, that's wrong too. But on the other hand, it can't possibly be that whatever we say is wrong, and whatever we say, the governments would ignore us. And in many of the processes, we notice that. Let me bring you to conclude. Let me bring you a recent example. We recently concluded a research in all Western Balkan countries about tailor-made laws. In the case of Albania, which I was covering it myself, we noticed that not only transparency, but the main problem with laws being tailored to serve illegitimate interests of political, economic, and even criminal groups in Albania was the lack of consultation and the lack of feedback. So we reached to that level that the governments don't care much about transparency. Do you want transparency? No problem. This is what I'm planning to do. This is my plan. This is public for everyone. You know? I'm going to ask you, but I'm not going to do whatever you say. At the end, this will be the bill. So the governments have reached to that level of courage. They are redefining the limits of what is transparency, what is consultation, who is right and who is wrong, and they are successfully even redefining the limits of even today's discussion. So there is a roadmap for fighting fake news. I haven't heard any roadmap for fighting other problems in the media so far.
Those are the characteristics, I would say, of the new normal and post-COVID-19 measures and establishments and behavior of all the governments, especially in the region of Western Balkans. Thank you very much for now. Now, I will kindly ask you for a 3 minutes break. We need just to change the second round of our speakers would come to the floor, and then we continue and proceed. As a journalist, and I was reporting very much from Serbia in recent years, I would say that fights against corruption and organized crime, establishing an efficient and fair judiciary, and perhaps respect for minority, these days migrant rights as well, are some of the priorities for the Serbian government. Would you add something to that list or not? And regarding those kind of challenges, what would be your assessment, how they deal with that?
Thank you. When it comes to the Serbian government priorities, among things that you mentioned, I think there are also other things, and this is how to stay in the power as long as possible. And I think that in this case, Serbia government and also everything that is happening with regard to the COVID and then vaccination and also state of emergency during the last year helped a lot in this regard to have a relatively monolith picture of one leader in the country who is ruling in a very authoritarian way, and he's using many topics, including organized crime, fight against corruption, in my mind, only as a narrative in further capturing the state. And that basically started practically in 2012, 2013, when all pools of power have been controlled. And nowadays, we have many topics, I know, Serbia-Kosovo dialogue, state capture, foreign investments, but these are used, unfortunately, only as narratives in further capturing the state.
So within that atmosphere, what are the possibilities anyway then of the civic society and media, especially in this post-COVID or COVID-19
Well,
situation?
I mean, we don't have opposition in the parliament, as probably you know, since last year, and we don't have critical voices in the society which are heard. The only remaining and yet credible partner, probably of international community and parts of the citizenry in Serbia, is the civil society. But civil society in Serbia has been attacked, and for example, since January 2000, we have seen more than 165 attacks be it physical threats and other things towards the civil society. Maybe it is worth mentioning that one journalist was arrested, which hasn't happened in Serbia since the fall of Milosevic. And this journalist from northern part of Serbia, Vojvodina, was simply reporting on the poor health conditions in one hospital in Vojvodina. Then again, other journalist's house was burned down because he was writing on the corruption scandal of his mayor in small municipalities. So you see, I mean, challenges are numerous. Civil society in Serbia is trying, although not really having too many friends nowadays, is to stick with the values and to defend the values. So in this case, we have come a long way from being promoter of European integration when the whole story started back in 2003 to being defender of European values in this country.
Thank you very much for now. Mr. Christoph Bender, protection of civil society and media outside of the European framework is something that you might explain to us your thoughts about it.
Okay, thank you, Dragan. When we look apart from the European Union, in Europe we have, on paper, the most extensive protection system for civil society, media, journalists. It's called the Council of Europe. Right? With one exception, all the Western Balkan countries are members of the Council of Europe. I mean, the exception, of course, is Kosovo, which is a bit weird, because if the interest is that human rights are protected, that minorities are respected, protected in Kosovo, then it's a bit, it doesn't really make much sense to keep it out of this institution. Anyway, so the European Convention on Human Rights applies directly in the Western Balkan countries. There's the Court of Human Rights. Everyone, journalists, civil society activists, excluding citizens from Kosovo, can bring a case to the court. If the court takes it up, there's a judgment, and then judgments are monitored by different institutions of the Council of Europe. So in principle, we have a structure for a really robust system. But there's a problem. As we've recently pointed out at the ESI, no one has been more often going to the European Court for Human Rights than Alexei Navalny, not less than 20 times. Yeah? The court has practically always sided with him. Last time in February 2021, ordering his immediate release. And this is binding, yeah, if you're a member of the Council of Europe. But Russia ignores, and so he is still in jail fighting for his life in a Russian prison. But still, yeah, we have this system, and it's something worth to kind of to build on. Yeah? The question is, how can we make this system work better? And what's also important to note when we look at the Western Balkans, when we compare judgments and the implementation of judgments with other Council of Europe member states, the Western Balkans is not a black hole with regard to human rights and the rule of law. Yeah? The Western Balkan countries are not Azerbaijan, they are not Russia, they are not Turkey. When you look at open priority files, so this means leading cases or important cases which are under enhanced supervision by the Committee of Ministers directly, so the most prominent and important cases. By the end of 2020, Albania, North Macedonia had 2 such open files. Bosnia 4, Serbia 5. Now this is maybe not great, but it's actually quite decent. Actually, for anyone who is interested, I have maybe you can give this around, a little overview of how European countries stay on this chart. So let me just conclude maybe with 3 points. The first one is, wouldn't it be a nice goal for all Western Balkan countries to strive to be part of the league of top performers who have only 1 or 0 priority cases open, like Germany, like Finland. At DSI, we're actually preparing a short paper on how Bosnia can achieve this. And it's actually not that difficult if they really make an effort. Second, civil society and media could, and I think should, be active in all this. By once kind of following and reporting much more intensively about cases, about judgments, about the implementation of judgments. But also, when addressing the weaknesses, which very, very clearly, as we have heard in this session, very clearly exist in the region. But when addressing it, also putting it into perspective and showing that essentially it's not so bad. And I think in a time when the Western Balkans has such a horrible reputation in Europe, we could really also need some positive news in this respect. And finally, countries that think that human rights and democratic principles are important also in Kosovo should form a coalition to push for Kosovo to be admitted to the Council of Europe. I think that's long overdue. Thank you.
Just to make the objection, of course, if you're not Azerbaijan, you're happy, but I think it's up to the situation how high you put the bar, So these countries would not be Finland or Switzerland or Germany, the whole region of Western Balkans, but also some other EU member countries surrounding them. But, it's the perspective, how you look upon it. Is it Azerbaijan or Finland?
It's true, but Hungary has 13 such open cases, Bulgaria has 18. So Bosnia is not so bad.
Thank you very much. Donika Emini, this dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, which is for us journalists as well here in the region these days again on the agenda. How much civil society and media, from your point of view, from the country that you are coming from, how does that look like? How much they are involved and what is their impact to it?
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, of course, who would I be if I don't talk about the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia? Slightly different from Georgi. In Kosovo, there is an option, for civil society people. It's to become part of the government. So the most, I think, the best cooperation there is to make you part of it. And then you are not sure whether they want you to be part of it because they value your opinion or they want to shut the critics down. Because if they had valued our opinion, they would have proactively included us in the process in the first place, even being an outsider in track 2 without having to be part of the government in order to, make our contributions, simple as that. When I was listening to Sir Robert Cooper, and I saw Lajčák here, but then he's not anymore. This explained his hot and cold relation with civil society. Where would the dialogue be today if civil society had been included and the media since day one, since when, 2011 when it started, and in promoting the positive aspects of the dialogue? I'm talking about the technical dialogue, which I consider one of the most successful one, apart from then what happened in 2013 and the Brussels Agreement. So if the civil society had been included since the beginning from the EU, because unfortunately, expect less from our governments. This is a case with civil society also in the EU integration process when it comes to structured cooperation. We always expect from the EU because, democratization, they are the machinery behind this. It's externally driven, but still expectations were that the EU would include civil society. And this did not happen. And Sir Cooper, when the EU thought about promoting the technical dialogue in 2018 after the Alba Forum. It took 7 years after the first agreements that have been signed for the EU to think that they need to be promoted. But then it was too late because then the dialogue took another turn, which was heavily political, and we were talking about the borders. We were not talking about freedom of movement anymore. No one acknowledged, the success of the freedom of movement because they were all talking about, well, let's, exchange territories. Maybe this is better than, moving freely towards Serbia or even within Kosovo. So this is the first problem, is that even the EU was already very late in including civil society. And as for the media, then, you know, unfortunately, it's even worse because what I get from the Kosovo part is that, you know, everything that is being out there in Serbia's tabloids is being translated and published in Kosovo without any filter. So if you don't create the narrative controls you. And then the media created a narrative which wasn't necessarily positive when it comes to the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. And this is a process that is still ongoing. I mean, in 2018 until 2020, we had this ups and downs because of the DC agreements, and we had the EU itself in a way criticizing former Ambassador Grenell for having an approach which was lacking transparency, monopolized, and even like lacking the top-down, the bottom-up approach. And then when the EU takes over, hoping, you know, to change, to make a positive change in the process, they become even less transparent. So, and then we feel excluded again. Today, we don't have civil society formally included in the process. We have created a platform in Kosovo. We are invited by the government. But what the government wants is not to be criticized, but to be supported, regardless what they want and what they do in the process, which is wrong. And the second one is that they don't see expertise in civil society because it's not just there to promote the dialogue, it's there to offer expertise. I mean, there is energy, there is telecom, there is, of course, Gazivoda, the Umani Lake that we are talking about, which needs, you know, specific expertise, which the government does not have. It needs from other people, not just civil society organizations, but also academia and independent experts. And the third one is that the EU is not making any effort to actually, you know, even push the government or proactively include the civil society organizations so far. What we have done, I mean, Vesela is not here now. I was hoping, because she was doing an immense job in sort of creating this internal dialogue between civil society in Kosovo and in Serbia, but that's an outsider. That's track 2. It is important, but not as important as being formally included by the government. So, I mean, I know it's a bit too long, but this is a wake-up call, not just, you know, for the governments of Kosovo and Serbia, but also because at least Vučić ticked the box with the internal dialogue, but also, also the EU to actually start over and start in a better way and deliver for the citizens, but also by making it inclusive for all.
Thank you, Donika. Quite interesting. There might be some interventions later for Q&As after your intervention. Is it wake-up call or too late for one other dispute that we are witnessing now? And I will ask that to, my question goes to Mr. Ljupčo Popovski regarding this veto of Bulgaria and North Macedonian accession path towards the EU. Do you think that perhaps this sudden alienation of two nations came because at certain points of time civic society and media, perhaps within both countries or in one country less or more, have not done their job properly as well and tried to influence?
No, I think that that alienation between the two societies came from the politicians. And that's not the role of the civil society and in media. And media was just part of it, not in the center of that. Like Mr. Maričić said before, that civil society and media has had roles in Macedonian-Greek dispute, but in this dispute between Sofia and Skopje, they played that bad role of the politicians, not to be good and skilled mediators. So it's unfortunately in this situation is their roles. I don't know how it will be in the future, but like a journalist, I will tell you some other things, not for the civil society and like the other said that. This incredible deterioration of the relation between Macedonia and Bulgaria in the last year and a half, maybe more, came suddenly. For many, it was like a storm, and destroyed everything what had been built skillfully in the last 15 years. I don't want to talk who were the culprits, but to speak what we achieved and now is buried, and I don't know when it will again come on the light of the day. And now, if you ask in Macedonian public, 8 from 10 people will said they don't understand what's happening now, what's going on in Bulgarian public, and why the people they called us like brothers want to blockade us. What's this is story of Abel and Cain? That that's like biblical story. I don't want to say that is, but if someone called him like brother and you want to blockade him, it's not understandable for Macedonian public, and even for more Macedonian, it's a disgusting theme for the enlargement process and for cooperation and brotherhood and the main consequences of this dispute is that old stereotypes and prejudice of each other have returned and cemented the path of mistrust. Lifting the blockade will not remove all this mistrust like a magic wand. It's not possible. I think we will need another 15 years to try to understand again each other like a year or 2 years before. But what is paradoxally, in this dispute, Macedonian people knows much more about Bulgarian public and Bulgarian journalists and Bulgarian, not civil society, because they are a part of this dispute. So Macedonians in past decade met Bulgarian art through the guest opera director, conductors, theater directors, and maybe 2 works of Macedonian writers have been translated in Bulgarian. I have to check it. And for years, Macedonia has slowly amortized the stereotypes we built around the Bulgarians and attitude towards the Macedonian national self-determination, their identity and language. So we learned about exceptional political analysis because we translate everything what was written in Bulgarian media. So previously we know very much remarkable Ivan Krastev or Dimitar Bechev. But after this dispute arises, we know that Daniel Smilov from Center for Liberal Strategies, Ivailo Dichev, professor of cultural anthropology in Sofia University, the political scientist Evgeny Dainov, Anna Krsteva, Vesela Charneva, who will be part of this discussion. So it was not Bulgarian people who we know when we are traveling to Sofia, to Borovets, Bansko, Sandanski, Pamporovo, that touristic places. But in the same time, we don't understand, the Macedonian public, why Bulgarian public has no clue what is going on in Macedonia. That's not understandable for us 100%. We think that their stereotypes are from 100 years ago. And when Macedonia was part of Yugoslavia, it was not but by our choice, not by Croatian, your choice, in the 1912, and after that in Kingdom of Serbia, and after that in Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and after that in Socialist Federation. So we were part of different culture area. We were not in the same area like in the Ottoman Empire. It was 80, maybe 100 years. So everything was changed. Macedonian grew up, and they were not their choice to live in that country. But we must accommodate it and live and prosper and take a part in this country. And the main question for Macedonia really is why they cannot see what are the people who live in Macedonia are now. That's a big puzzle. And I don't know if they try to find answers. Just just to mention that when in the beginning of 2000, the former president of Bulgaria, Petar Stoyanov, said once that Macedonia is the most romantic part of Bulgarian history. It was shocking for us. We don't know what part of Macedonia he's talking about Pir Macedonia or Macedonia, who is an agency of this part of Macedonia. It was because we thought that that part of the history is solved.
Thank you very much for now, Mr. Popovsky. And our last participant and speaker is Ms. Vesela Cherneva. She's going to join us by video call. Perhaps, Ms. Cherneva, from your point of view, what is the horizon into the future when it comes to this dispute and involvement of civil society and media in both countries and as well in Bulgaria?
Thank you very much, Dragan. And I am sorry I cannot be with you in Ohrid. I do mean this because I am a serial Ohrid goer, and I hope to be there again soon. I will, of course, speak briefly about what has just been said, but also what Bojan Maricic earlier mentioned, taking maybe as a baseline what Robert mentioned in the first part, that the real purpose of the EU is learning to do things together and becoming friends by doing things together. And this is, I think, something that we need to learn in the region, that in many cases we cannot solve things necessarily top down. A lot of them have to start bottom up, and the role of civil society is crucial because, as also Igor mentioned, media in our countries is controlled to a high extent. Civil society is the crucial bridge between kind of the wider population and politics. The Bulgarian-Macedonian Friendship Treaty was a great basis. I mean, I really think it's an excellent document. The problem is that it remained on paper. Like many other things in the Balkans, implementation is not our strongest part. And I think here we do owe our societies also a bit more leaning in. A lot of Bulgarians analysts have been mentioned by the previous speaker. I think this group in Bulgaria is even larger of analysts, civil society people, civil society organizations who really oppose the course of the previous government and would support the shift that the current one is trying slowly to perform. From that perspective, I am optimistic because we know that civil societies in the Balkans have been on the right side of history, so to say, on many occasions in the crucial moments, actually. I mean, we remember how Milosevic fell, we remember how Gruevski had to go. I think this is also why Borisov finally ended his rule after 12 years, simply because civil societies at some point make a crucial step. One reason not to be so optimistic, I think, is our demography in the whole region, and the fact that a lot of the young people, a lot of the most active representatives of civil society leave our countries, and this is, I think, mid to long term, the big challenge for us, how to keep the quality, the density of the civil society conversation. In the concrete Bulgarian-Macedonian case, we have already had quite good cooperation with the Institute for Democracy and Civil Society in Skopje. We did co-host the Berlin Process Civil Society and Think Tank Forum last year. Of course, there are many other colleagues and organizations in Skopje with which we cooperate. And these connections, I think, are going to be there to stay. As I said, a lot of work still ahead of us. If you allow me one second point, which I think is also valid when we talk about civil society in the Western Balkans, corruption has been mentioned many times. We had very recently here in Bulgaria a Global Magnitsky Act order by the State Department listing 3 individuals, part of the oligarchy that has been plaguing the country for a long time. This was the moment when civil society in Bulgaria, but I think also elsewhere, saw that what we knew, right, what we thought was right, was actually provable and documentable. And it turned out that a lot of the evidence for this Global Magnitsky Act order have been built on civil society research. And I would really encourage representatives across the region to pay attention to this work. This is very, very important part of our role. You have probably seen the White House executive order, which says that corruption and corrupt leaders in the Balkans will have to pay their price without naming names. I think this is a chance for our groups to keep the pace and to keep the pressure. And at the end of the day, I think we can really see very soon better times for the region, both politically, but I think in this kind of slower than we hoped, but still reform of our societies and our governance systems. Thanks a lot, and sorry again for not being with you there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cherneva, for your intervention. If I may add, it's always the most important to be on the right side of the history. Thank you very much for your time. It was a panel that lasted more than an hour and a half with numerous participants and with some of the interesting thoughts and interventions that we have heard. I'm sure if there are some additional Q&As that you might pose them to our participants in a coffee break or something. Now there is a family photo envisaged for the speakers on behalf of the organizers, and this panel warmly thank you for the participation and your attention. Thank you very much. Stay the audience for the next panel here.
The family photo is going to be out.